Alright guys, welcome to the new product launch for the new amp. There's a couple of things that I want to make sure we hit, some pointers that I think would be good to have in a new amp. So first off, I think we should make it more affordable. Our current line is, pretty pricey and worth it, but I think hitting a more affordable price point would work. I do think it should be more portable, being able to take it to places like rehearsals and studios would be beneficial. And I think it should still be a good representation of what we are as an amp company. It should really have the two-rock sound in it, even though it is a little bit more affordable. And it should look like one of those Transformer robots. Although, not one that turns into a cool car, like one that was assigned to turn into a guitar amp, but also it didn't really know what a guitar amp looked like, so it just did its best guess, so it still kind of ended up looking like a Transformer guitar amp box thing. And the knob should light up. So there are certain brands that carry a level of prestige that entire communities aspire to own a piece of gear from that brand. We see this in many different markets. Rolex for watches, Ferrari for cars, Leica for cameras, the Taco Bell Cantina that I randomly stumbled upon in Fort Lauderdale one time for fast food. No matter what hobby you're into, there seem to be a handful of brands that represent the pinnacle of function and quality for the industry. They're the kind of brands that you may have apparel of or posters in your house of, but you don't own anything from them and you aspire to have something by them one day. These brands typically represent a goal that you aspire to reach. The feeling of maybe one day I will actually have something from this brand. For me, in the guitar amp world, that brand is Two Rock Amplification. Two Rock are a small boutique amp manufacturer in California that made a name for themselves making Dumble-esque amps. Two Rock showed up on my radar along with a bunch of other guitarists when I first saw the best 240p video I've ever seen in my life titled Two Rock Signature Amp by John Mayer. And it's no doubt that John Mayer put the brand on the map when they became the answer to, wow, how did Mayer get that sound on the Continuum album? From there, Two Rock just continued the stacked guitar players that I admired the tone of. Ariel Posen, Joey Landreth, Artur Menezes. It seems like every time that I heard a truly deep, full, beautiful tone, a Two Rock was behind it. Now, there is just one problem with people like me that aspire to own a Two Rock. They are astronomically pricey. Like many of the other brands that I mentioned in the video, Two Rock not only has their status because they are the pinnacle of guitar tone, but also because they are at the top of the pricing bracket in the guitar amp world. And not only that, but even if you do have the cash to buy a Two Rock, there can be a waiting list. Not king of tone crazy, and it does seem to ebb and flow when there is stock, but it's still not as easy as going down to your local Guitar Center or logging on the Sweetwater and just purchasing a Two Rock. They're made in small batches, and it seems to be common for there to be around a 6-month wait to get one depending on where Two Rock is in the current batch. And this left me exactly where a lot of aspirational brands leave you. Dreaming of the day that I had $4 to $5K laying around that I could dedicate to a Two Rock amplifier. And that day has not come yet. But I indeed own a Two Rock. I actually own two. So with all that being said, how did I become the owner of two Rocks if I don't have 4 to 5 Gs to throw around? And the answer to that comes down to 3 things: the used market, odd designs, and the Premier Builders Guild. Both Two Rocks I own fall under all 3 of these categories. One I will save for another video because it is the crown jewel of my collection and it has its own unique points to go over. But the one I'm talking about today is the strongest. What am I, Jameis Winston? But the one I'm talking about today is the strongest example of those 3 things. So number 1, like all things, if you buy the item used, it costs less money. generally. And this is how most middle-class folks end up with aspiring brand items. You find something used that generally creeps down to your price range. Now with Two Rocks, this can actually be a little tricky because with some of their models, they actually appreciate in value because either there's a wait list for them or there was very limited models made to begin with. All John Mayer's signature Two Rocks are used and their price certainly did not go down. And also, people who can afford to buy new Two Rocks typically take care of them because they cost so much. So most Two Rocks are in the excellent to mint condition price range. I don't see very many abused Two Rocks the way I see like PVs, for instance. Now, the second thing going in favor of this amp is, we'll say, interesting design choices, mainly cosmetically. This Two Rock does not look like any other Two Rocks ever made, and quite frankly, it looks closer to a toaster than a guitar amp. And lastly, it was built during the Premier Builders Guild era of Two Rock. Now, without going on a long history lesson about something that I barely know about, around 2010, Two Rock was sold to a larger company called Premier Builders Guild. And PBG was an umbrella company that had other brands such as Fano guitars and Tone King amps. PBG era Two Rocks seem to, we'll say, be slightly looked down upon. Now, I will say I can find no evidence that the quality actually took a dramatic downturn. Both Two Rocks I own are PBG era Two Rocks, and they are beautifully hand-wired. But I will say, if you look over the PBG era, it was very apparent that Premier Builders Guild wanted a broader audience for Two Rock, which led them to some odd design choices and trying to cater to a little bit lower end of the market. Certainly still fancy and boutique, but, not necessarily $4,000 to $5,000 fancy. Now, I will say, of the strange choices that Premier Builders Guild made, I think that this amp takes the cake. Now, Two Rock was eventually sold back to the original owners in 2016, and PBG folded. At least I think they did. I can't find any more information about them. So the Premier Builders Guild era of amps is about 2010 to 2016, and these seem to be less desirable than the higher-end ones that are made prior to that and after that. So without further ado, I present to you what is, in my opinion, the most slept-on Two Rock amp ever, the XO15. Okay, now let's address the elephant in the room. This is a weird-looking amp. Nothing about this thing screams Two Rock. If you had a poster in your bedroom as a kid of a Two Rock amp, it didn't look like this. Heck, the Two Rock logo is just kind of thrown in the corner of this thing. Now, what's even crazier is I don't have the matching cabinet that was sold with this, which made the setup look even more sci-fi in my opinion. Side note, that blue and white version looks incredible. To this day, it's wild to me that this thing got all the way through the design process into production. Now, I will pause to say, this kind of thing has been done before, and I don't think it's a bad idea. An amp that is cut down to just the chassis to be a lunchbox style amp so that it can cut down on weight and cost is something that plenty of companies have done. The Vox Night Train, Orange Tiny Terror, Bogma Atma, EVH 5153, there have been plenty of these out on the market. But with the possible exception of the Bogner, all of these are household amp names that go for well under $2,000 most of the time. None of these brands are typically considered the Rolex of the guitar world. So this reach down to the general consumer world by Two Rock is a very interesting move. So I looked it up, and the XO15 sold for $1,295 when it debuted in 2012. Which in today's money is $1,772. I absolutely cannot believe that I had to do an adjusted for inflation calculation for something that was made in 2012. But I am getting older and inflation has been crazy lately, so here we are. So while it's not what I call a budget amp, it was kept under $1,500, which is pretty impressive for Two Rock considering the rest of their catalog at the time. Now this also stood out because it was one of their only low wattage options at the time, which says a lot for a company that is known for their 100-watt amps. It was also quite versatile for the price range. Two Rock's entry-level amps have always been kind of niche. The entry-level Cardiff was British-voiced, and the entry-level Burnside that is currently in their catalog has a very strong tweed voicing. So the XO15 having the full complement of EQ, contour, gain, and master volume that its big brother amps had is very interesting. And to this day, it is an incredible value proposition. Now, a term thrown around way too much in gear circles is bang for your buck, but honestly, the XO15 fits that bill. I paid a little over $1,400 for mine in 2022. Now, that's not in any way, shape, or form a budget amp, but again, currently 2Rock's lowest offering, the Burnside, goes for $23.99. So a sub $1,500 2Rock is an absolute steal. And go ahead, after you're done watching this video, hop on Reverb, eBay, and search for 2Rocks. Under $1,500 is laughable. Some of their cabs don't go for under $1,500 used. Now you may say, Tyler, okay, fine, it's $1,500, but certainly it's a toy. Plenty of big companies slap their name on inferior products just to say that they have a budget option. So let's look at what you actually get for $1,500 with the XO15. First off, you get the hand-wired quality that all 2Rocks are known for. This wasn't built in another facility or using PCB boards. This was built right alongside any other 2Rocks of the time. It has the famous contour control and 2Rock clean sound that they're known for. And I will add, not just cleans, the grit on this thing is pretty good. It has an effects loop. It has 3 speaker taps on the back and the 3 most common ohm types. And in my opinion, it's the best 2Rock ever made for home, studio, and small venues considering its size, weight, and wattage. And of course, you own a 2Rock. You're part of the club. You actually have a real authentic 2Rock. And it didn't cost you several months' rent. It only costed you 1-ish month's rent. I don't know what your rent is, so I'm sorry if that's inaccurate. And in the world of aspirational pinnacle brands, there's very little compromise here. If a used Rolex, Ferrari, or Leica became obtainable, they would most likely have issues and drawbacks. An affordable Rolex would most likely need repairs. An affordable Ferrari would most likely have a blown engine and flood damage, and possibly be stolen if it was that affordable. And by the time the Leica became affordable, it would probably have specs far outdone by just off-the-shelf cameras. But with the XO15, as long as you can accept that it's an ugly little duckling, it sounds great and it delivers the 2Rock tone in spades. As a matter of fact, there's reports of someone talking to 2Rock for tech support, and the tech actually mentioning that they preferred the XO15 to some of their flagship models. Now, this is from a post in the gear page, so take that for what it's worth. But honestly, a lot of the compromises with the XO15 are kind of strengths. I don't own a lot of tube amps that I can put in a little bag, sling over my shoulder, and go right to a gig or studio. And if I did, it certainly wouldn't have the pedigree that 2Rock has. Now here's where I have to disappoint you a bit as I land the video. If I have indeed convinced you that the XO15 is a sleeper amp and you should acquire one, I have a little bit of bad news. They are discontinued and they have been for a while now. I don't have numbers to back this up, but I do not think they were big sellers. I simply say this because 2Rock never made another amp like this. Premier Builders Guild ended up selling 2Rock back to the initial owners, and there's not a whole lot on the internet about this amp. So all of that adds up to, these are kind of hard to find. Now I will say, ironically, it's actually the only 2Rock that I've seen available in my local Dayton, Ohio area. And a couple times a year, I do see these pop up online for sale. But as of the recording of this video, there have only been 2 that have been listed and sold on Reverb. So that may give you a bit of an idea about how rare these things are. But hey, again, we're talking a grail item here that could very well become the best amp in your collection. So having to wait a little bit for one to pop up may be necessary. And honestly, I think you would be waiting longer for a Rolex or Ferrari that you could afford anyways. I will close with this. I don't mean for this video to sell you on 2Rocks in general. If you have always felt that 2Rocks are overpriced and nothing special, then the XO15 will not change your mind. Even at around $1,500, it is very expensive for what it is if you don't find anything charming about the 2Rock sound. Just like Leicas are very expensive for just a camera and Ferraris are very expensive for just a car. If you're not into the brand, it's not going to justify the price. This video is mainly for those like me who have been infatuated with the 2Rock sound, figured that they would never own one, and either didn't know about or had written off the XO15. My only message here is that an authentic 2-rock may not be quite as out of reach as you thought it was.